The air in the bar was thick with the smell of stale beer, cheap whiskey, and desperation. It was a Tuesday night in Port Victory, Virginia, which meant the place was mostly empty, save for a few old-timers nursing their drinks at the far end of the counter. Sam, his face a roadmap of wrinkles carved by 60 years of hard living and a tour in Vietnam, was wiping down the bar with a slow, methodical rhythm. He owned this place. The Salty Dog. It wasn't much, but it was his. Behind the bar, lost in the shadows, Maya Rivas was stocking glasses. To anyone who bothered to look, she was just the new co-owner, quiet, efficient. Her movements were precise, economical. Nothing wasted. Her dark hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and her eyes held a stillness that didn't belong in a rundown dive bar on the edge of the Atlantic. They were eyes that had seen too much and said too little. The front door swung open with a bang, letting in a blast of salty, humid air and 3 men who carried trouble like a second skin. The man in the lead was Jedediah Stone. He was big, soft in the middle, with a face that was perpetually flushed with cheap liquor and self-importance. His 2 goons fanned out behind him, their cheap leather jackets creaking in the sudden silence. Jed swaggered up to the bar, slapping his meaty hand down on the freshly wiped surface. "Sammy boy," he drawled, his voice a low rumble. "Looking a little slow tonight. Business must be tough." Sam didn't look up, he just kept wiping. "It pays the bills, Jed. What do you want?" "What do I want?" Jed chuckled, a wet, unpleasant sound. "I want what's mine. The Port Victory Vipers, we provide a service, you see, we keep the peace. Make sure places like this don't have accidents." He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "and that service, it ain't free." Maya stopped stocking glasses, her hands froze mid-air. She didn't turn, didn't make a sound, but every muscle in her body went rigid. She was a statue carved from coiled tension. Sam finally stopped wiping. He placed the rag on the counter and looked Jed straight in the eye. "I told you before, Jed, I'm paid up. Paid my taxes, paid my dues. I don't need your kind of peace." Yet smile vanished, his eyes narrowed. "You old relic, you think a few medals on your wall make you a king in this town. That was a different war, old man. This is my town. My rules." He gestured with his chin towards Maya, who was still frozen in the shadows. "Maybe your new partner here can help you understand. Pretty thing like that, she shouldn't be working in a dump like this. She should be entertained." One of the goons snickered. That was the line. Sam's jaw tightened. "You leave her out of this. This is between you and me." "Oh, I don't think so," Jed sneered, his gaze crawling over Maya's form. He reached across the bar and grabbed the front of Sam's worn-out flannel shirt, yanking the older man forward. "You're gonna learn respect, you decrepit old fossil." And then he never finished the sentence. From the shadows, a voice cold and flat cut through the tension. "Let him go." Jed turned, surprised. Maya had moved. She was standing in the dim light now, her face impassive. Her dark eyes, however, were no longer still. They were burning with a cold fire. Jed laughed, releasing Sam with a shove. Well, the little mouse speaks. "What are you gonna do about it, sweetheart? You gonna hit me with a beer bottle?" Maya took a single step forward. The movement was fluid, silent. "I'm not going to ask again." The air crackled. The old-timers at the end of the bar held their breath. Yet's face contorted with rage. His ego, fragile as glass, had been shattered. Humiliated by an old man, and now challenged by a woman. He lunged around the bar, his hand reaching for her. "You insolent little bitch, I'll teach you." His hand never made it. Maya's movement was a blur. One moment she was standing there, the next, she had sidestepped his clumsy charge. Her left hand shot out, not in a punch, but with an open palm striking the side of his neck with a sickening thud, the vaguest nerve strike. Yet's eyes rolled back in his head, and his entire body went limp, collapsing to the floor in a heap. The 2 goons stared, mouths agape, for a full second. It was a second too long. Maya moved on the closest one before he could even process what had happened. Her right hand grabbed his wrist, twisting it at an unnatural angle. A sharp crack echoed in the bar as his wrist broke. As he screamed, her left elbow slammed into his jaw. He dropped like a stone. The third man, finally jolted into action, pulled a knife. He was smarter, more cautious. He held it in a low grip, feinting. Maya didn't even look at the knife. She looked at his eyes. She saw the fear, the hesitation. She took a step back, drawing him in. As he lunged, she dropped low, sweeping his leg out from under him. He hit the floor hard, the air exploding from his lungs. Before he could recover, she brought the heel of her boot down on his knife hand. Another crack, another scream. Silence. It had taken less than 5 seconds. 3 grown men, unconscious or writhing in agony on the floor of her bar. Sam stared, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock and awe. The quiet, reserved woman he'd partnered with, the one who flinched at loud noises and sometimes stared into space for minutes at a time, was a phantom, a wraith. Maya stood over the 3 men, her chest rising and falling in a steady, controlled rhythm. Her face was still a mask, but her eyes, that cold fire, had become a raging inferno. She looked down at Jed, who was beginning to groan. She leaned down, her voice a whisper that was more terrifying than any shout. "This is not your town," she hissed. "These are not your rules." She stood up, turning to face the stunned silence of the bar. Her gaze met Sam's, and for the first time since he'd known her, he saw a flicker of the ghost she was running from. It was a look of profound regret and bone-deep weariness. The quiet life she had been so desperately trying to build had just been blown to pieces. The war she thought she had left behind had found her. Detective Frank Miller hated the docks. They smelled of dead fish and corruption. He stood in the doorway of the Salty Dog, taking in the scene. 3 members of the Port Victory Vipers were being loaded into ambulances. Jed Stone had a concussion. The other 2 had a broken wrist, a broken jaw, and a shattered hand between them. And the person responsible, according to the shell-shocked witnesses, was the woman standing calmly behind the bar, wiping away a spot of blood that wasn't hers. "Maya Rivas," Miller asked, his voice gravelly from too many cigarettes and too many long nights. She nodded, not looking at him. "Detective, my officers tell me you did this," he said, gesturing to the carnage. "All 3 of them, by yourself." "They were assaulting my partner," she replied, her voice flat. "They threatened me. It was self-defense." Miller walked over to the bar, his eyes scanning her. She was lean, but there was a wiry strength to her frame that the loose-fitting t-shirt couldn't hide. It was the way she stood, perfectly balanced, relaxed, yet ready to spring at a moment's notice. He'd seen that posture before, in soldiers. In cops who'd seen too much action. "Self-defense," he repeated, a hint of disbelief in his tone. "Jed Stone outweighs you by 100 pounds. His boys aren't exactly choir boys. You expect me to believe you took them all down in under a minute with no weapon, and you barely have a scratch on you?" Maya finally stopped wiping and met his gaze. Her eyes were like chips of obsidian. "I was lucky," Miller grunted. He didn't believe in luck. He believed in patterns, and this didn't fit any pattern he knew. "I'm going to need you to come down to the station. Give a formal statement." "Of course," she said, her voice betraying no emotion. Hours later, in a sterile interrogation room, she told him the same story. Word for word, no embellishment, no hesitation. It was a perfect, airtight account of self-defense, too perfect. While she spoke, Miller reviewed her file. Maya Rivas, age 32, born in El Paso, orphaned at a young age. Enlisted in the Navy at 18, the rest was sparse. Honorable discharge after 10 years of service. A few commendations, nothing major listed. But large chunks of her service record were classified, redacted. Miller knew what that meant. Special operations. He closed the file. The story was believable on the surface. Jed Stone and his crew were known troublemakers. But the efficiency, the brutal, disabling precision of the injuries, that wasn't a bartender defending herself. That was a professional neutralizing a threat. Meanwhile, across town, in a penthouse apartment overlooking the harbor, Marcus Thorne listened to the report with cold amusement. Thorne was the opposite of Jed Stone. Where Jed was loud and brutish, Thorne was quiet and surgical. He wore a tailored suit, his silver hair was perfectly coiffed, and he ran the Port Victory shipping industry with the kind of ruthless efficiency that had crushed all his competitors. The Vipers were a useful, if crude, tool for managing his less legitimate business interests on the waterfront. So, this woman, this bartender, broke my top earner's jaw and put his entire crew in the hospital. Thorne asked, swirling a glass of expensive scotch. His voice was calm, but the man delivering the report, a sleek enforcer named Kane, knew better than to be fooled by the placid exterior. "Yes, sir," Kane said. "Jedediah Stone is humiliated. He wants retribution." Thorne took a sip of his scotch, his eyes fixed on the city lights below. "Retribution is for fools, Kane. Humiliation is a lesson, and I am intrigued. A woman with that kind of skill set doesn't end up pouring drinks in a dive bar by accident. She's either running from something or hiding from someone." He turned to face Kane, a predator smile touching his lips. "Find out who she is. I want to know everything. Where she lives, who she talks to, what she eats for breakfast, what makes her heart beat faster, and what makes it stop." A person with her skills could be a valuable asset, his eyes hardened. Or a significant liability that needs to be managed. Kane nodded, his face impassive. He was Thorne's right hand, a former private military contractor with a past as shadowy as his employers. He lived for this kind of work, the hunt. "And Kane," Thorne added, as his enforcer turned to leave, "be discreet. A creature like this, if she is what I think she is, will smell a trap a mile away. We don't want to startle her. We want to corner her." The net was being cast. Marcus Thorne saw Rivas as a fascinating new piece on his chessboard. He had no idea that he wasn't playing with a pawn, he was poking a sleeping grizzly bear. And she was about to wake up. The nightmares came back that night, not in waves, but in a full-blown tsunami. Maya was back in the Hindu Kush Mountains, the air thin and biting cold. The crackle of the radio in her ear, the scent of cordite, the metallic taste of fear in her mouth. She saw the face of her spotter, David, his grin as he gave her the thumbs up. And then the muzzle flash from the ridge across the valley, the sickening thud. David's grin vanishing, replaced by a look of shocked surprise as a red flower bloomed on his chest. She woke up gasping, tangled in her sweat-soaked sheets. Her small apartment above the bar was dark, but the ghosts were all there. The mission had been a success, but the cost had been too high. They had called her Wraith in the teams. She could move unseen, unheard, a phantom who delivered death from a distance. But after David the ghost had become her, she couldn't shake him. So she had run. She'd left the Navy, left DevGru, left everything behind to find a silence that the mountains had stolen from her. Port Victory was supposed to be that silence. For weeks, an uneasy peace settled over the waterfront. Jed Stone and his vipers were nowhere to be seen. The salty dog was quiet, but Maya felt it. The cold prickle on the back of her neck that told her she was being watched. She would catch glimpses of a black sedan parked down the street for too long, a man reading a newspaper on a bench across the road who never turned the page. They were professionals, subtle, patient. She fell back into her training without even thinking about it. She altered her routes to and from the bar. She checked for trackers on her old pickup truck. She slept with a heavy maglite next to her bed. She was a soldier in a war only she knew was being waged. Kane was good. He stayed in the shadows, collecting pieces of her life like a morbid scrapbook. He saw her sparse, disciplined routine, the way she never let anyone stand behind her. Her weekly calls to the one person whose picture she kept by her bed, a smiling young man. Kane dug deeper. Leo Rivas, Maya's younger brother, her only living relative. A brilliant engineering student at Virginia Tech, his tuition paid for by his sister's savings. He was her anchor, her purpose, her one glaring vulnerability. Kane delivered his report to Marcus Thorne in the penthouse. Thorne listened intently, a thin smile playing on his lips. "A brother," he said, almost purring. How beautifully cliché. A knight is only as strong as the castle they are sworn to protect. It seems we found the weak spot in her castle walls. Thorne stood up and walked to his window, looking down at the sprawling port, his port. "The time for observation is over, Kane. It's time to send a message, a clear one. Let's see how our ghost reacts when she realizes her chains aren't just in her head." The message arrived the next morning. When Maya went down to open the bar, she found the front door unlocked. Nothing was stolen, nothing was broken. But on the bar, directly under the spotlight, was a single, dead seagull. And pinned beneath its wing with a steak knife was a crisp, new photograph. It was a picture of her brother, Leo. He was walking across the campus quad, laughing, a textbook under his arm. It was a candid shot, taken from a distance, a sniper's distance. Maya's blood ran cold. This wasn't a threat from a street thug like Jed. This was a statement. We know who you are. We know where you live. And we can touch the only thing in the world you care about. Her hands began to shake, not with fear, but with a rage so profound it was almost paralyzing. They had crossed a line that should never have been crossed. They had brought her family into this. They had brought the war to her doorstep. She picked up the phone, her fingers punching in Leo's number. Hey, May, what's up? His cheerful voice came through the line. Leo, she said, her own voice tight, strained. How are you? Is everything okay? Yeah, great, just heading to the library. Midterms are killing me. Why, you sound weird. No reason, she lied, forcing a calmness she didn't feel. Just be careful, okay? Keep your head up, pay attention to your surroundings. Okay, he said, confused. You sound like you're back in the Navy. I gotta go. Love you. I love you too, she whispered, after he had hung up. She stood there in the silent bar, the photograph in her trembling hand. The silence she had craved was now a suffocating shroud of dread. She had tried to run from her past, to bury the Wraith. But Marcus Thorne and his wolves had dug her up. And they were about to learn a very hard lesson. You don't corner a ghost because you have no idea what else is lurking with it in the darkness. The threat hung in the air, a poison that tainted everything. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat, every passing car a potential enemy. Sleep offered no escape, only replays of David's death mixed with new, terrifying images of Leo in a sniper's crosshairs. Maya was living on a knife's edge. But the fear was slowly being forged into something else, something hard and sharp, a weapon. She began to prepare. She went through the bar, the apartment, her truck, looking for listening devices. She found two, one under the bar, one in the dome light of her pickup. Amateurs would have destroyed them. Maya left them in place, let them listen. Let them think they had the upper hand. She went to a pawn shop in the bad part of town and bought 3 untraceable burner phones. She went to a hardware store and bought heavy-duty zip ties, a roll of duct tape, and a crowbar. To the cashier, she was a woman planning some home repairs. In reality, she was assembling a war kit. The call came 2 nights later. A burner phone she'd left in the bar's office chirped to life. The number was blocked, she answered. Ms. Rivas, a smooth, cultured voice said. It was Marcus Thorne. I do hope my correspondence was received and understood. What do you want? Maya's voice was ice. A conversation, a business proposal, you might say. I find myself in admiration of your unique talents. I believe we could be of great use to one another. I'm not for sale. Thorne chuckled. Everything is for sale, my dear. It's just a matter of finding the right currency, and I know yours. A bright young man with a promising future in engineering. It would be a tragedy if that future were cut short. Maya closed her eyes, gripping the phone so tightly her knuckles turned white. Where? The old naval shipyard. Pier 4, midnight. Come alone, come unarmed. My associate Kane will greet you. Any deviation from these instructions and your brother will receive a visit from a far less pleasant associate. Do we have an understanding? Understood, she bit out, and the line went dead. It was a trap, a blatant, obvious trap. They wanted her on their turf, isolated, vulnerable. They thought they were luring a frightened woman into a cage. They had no idea they had just invited the Wolf into their den. As midnight approached, the sky opened up, unleashing a torrential downpour. Rain hammered against the tin roof of the Salty Dog. It was perfect. The rain would mask sound, distort light, create confusion. It was seal weather. Maya dressed in black jeans, a black t-shirt, and combat boots. She strapped a Kabar knife to her ankle and tucked a length of garrote wire into her waistband. She wasn't coming unarmed. She was coming as herself. The old naval shipyard was a ghost town of rust and decay. Skeletal cranes loomed like metallic dinosaurs against the stormy sky. Pier 4 was a massive, cavernous warehouse at the very end of the spit of land, surrounded on 3 sides by the churning, black water of the Atlantic. She parked her truck a half-mile away and approached on foot, moving through the labyrinth of shipping containers and abandoned equipment like a shadow. Her senses were on fire. Every drop of rain, every gust of wind, every creak of rusting metal telling her a story. Kane was waiting for her at the warehouse entrance, a silhouette against the dim light spilling from within. He held a large umbrella, which he did not offer her. "You came," he said, his voice flat. "Mr. Thorne will be pleased." "Let's get this over with," Maya said, letting the rain plaster her hair to her face. He gestured for her to enter. The warehouse was vast, filled with shadows and the drip of water from the leaky roof. In the center of the cavernous space, a single bare bulb illuminated a small circle of light. Marcus Thorne sat in a leather armchair, a portable heater glowing beside him. He was flanked by half a dozen of his best men, Jed Stone among them, his face a mask of smug anticipation. "Welcome, Ms. Rivas," Thorne said, spreading his hands in a gesture of magnanimity. "Please, don't mind the rain. Come in and hear my offer." Maya walked slowly into the circle of light, her eyes never leaving Thorne, but her senses cataloging everything else. 6 men besides Thorne and Kane, 2 near the main door, 1 on a catwalk to the left, 3 clustered around Thorne. The warehouse was filled with potential cover. Pallets of rotting supplies, old machinery covered in tarps, perfect. "I'm not here for your offer," Maya said, her voice echoing slightly in the huge space. Thorne's smile tightened. "No, then why are you here?" Maya stopped about 20 feet from him. She slowly raised her head, and for the first time, she let the mask drop. She let him see the Wraith, the cold, unblinking predator she had tried so hard to bury. A slow, chilling smile touched her lips. "I'm not here to negotiate," she said, her voice dropping to a low, lethal whisper. "I'm here to deliver a message of my own. To educate you. You wanted a war, Mr. Thorne. Congratulations." And with that, she kicked a loose piece of scrap metal on the floor, sending it skittering into the darkness. In the instant that every eye flickered towards the sound, she melted back into the shadows, vanishing as if she had never been there at all. A stunned silence fell over the warehouse, broken only by the sound of the rain and Thorne's suddenly ragged breathing. "Find her," he roared, his composure finally cracking. "Find that bitch and bring her to me." The hunt had begun, but the roles had been reversed. The sheep they thought they had cornered was of Ulf, and this was her forest. The warehouse became a symphony of terror, conducted by a ghost. The hunters became the hunted. Thorne's men spread out, their flashlights cutting nervous beams through the oppressive darkness. They called out to each other, their voices tight with a fear they tried to mask with bravado. "Find anything?" "Nothing. It's like she disappeared." Maya was on the move, a whisper in the dark. She climbed a stack of crates with silent, spider-like grace, her eyes now fully adjusted to the gloom. She saw 2 of the men moving together below her, their backs to each other, a classic, flawed formation. She dropped a heavy wrench she'd picked up onto a metal drum 50 feet to their left. Clang. The sound echoed through the warehouse like a gunshot. The 2 men spun, flashlights and weapons pointing at the noise. "Over there," one of them yelled, and they moved toward the sound. It was the oldest trick in the book, and they fell for it. As they passed beneath her perch, Maya dropped. She landed on the shoulders of the rear man, her legs wrapping around his neck in a perfect chokehold. His partner turned, but it was too late. Maya used the man's body as a shield and a pivot point, swinging her legs out to kick the second man's knees from behind. He buckled, and as he fell forward, she was already tightening her grip. The man in her grasp went limp, unconscious. She dropped him and was on the second man before he could get up, a quick, precise strike to the temple with the butt of her fist knocking him out cold. To down, the whole exchange was silent, save for a few muffled grunts lost in the drumming of the rain. She dragged their bodies behind a rusted piece of machinery and vanished again. From the center of the warehouse, Jed Stone was getting jumpy. "What was that? Did you hear that?" "Shut up, Jed." Kane's voice cut through the darkness. "Stay sharp." Maya watched from the catwalk she had silently ascended. She saw Jed, standing near a large electrical panel, his knuckles white as he gripped a tire iron. He was a bully, not a soldier. Fear was eating him alive. He was the weak link. She dislodged a small pebble with the toe of her boot, letting it fall to the concrete floor just behind him. Tick! Jed spun around, his eyes wide. "Who's there?" Silence. He turned back around, and Maya was there, standing right in front of him, her face inches from his. She had descended from the catwalk like an angel of death. Jed let out a strangled gasp, a pathetic whimper. He swung the tire iron wildly. Maya ducked under the swing, stepping inside his reach. Her hand shot up, fingers stiff, and jabbed hard into his throat. He gagged, dropping the weapon, hands flying to his crushed windpipe as he fought for air. She hit him once more, a hammer fist to the solar plexus that folded him in half. 3 down. The remaining men were in a full-blown panic now. They had stopped searching and were retreating back to the small circle of light where Thorn stood, his face pale and slick with sweat. "Where is she?" he shrieked. "She's a ghost," one of the men whimpered. "I'm right here." Maya's voice drifted down from the rafters. Every flashlight beam snapped upward, catching her for a brief second, perched on a steel beam like a gargoyle, before she dropped back into the darkness. The distraction was all she needed. While their eyes were pointed up, she used a rope she'd found to swing down to the far side of the warehouse, landing behind the last 2 of Thorn's regular goons. They never even knew she was there. A zip tie pulled tight around one's neck, cutting off his air until he passed out. The other turned at the sound of his partner slumping to the floor, only to meet Maya's boot square in his face. 5 down. Now it was just Thorn and Kane. Kane stood beside Thorn's chair, his gun held in a steady, professional grip. He wasn't panicked, he was alert, listening, waiting. He was a predator, too. He knew this game. "Impressive," Kane called out into the darkness, his voice calm. "But you're not the only one who has played in the shadows, Wraith." He knew her call sign. The word hit Maya like a physical blow. How could he possibly know that? Thorn did his homework, Kane continued, slowly turning, his eyes scanning the darkness. "Devgru, Team 6, an unfortunate incident in the Hindu Kush, a dead spotter. You ran, came here to hide. But you can't hide from what you are." He was trying to get in her head, to make her angry, to make her sloppy. The old Maya might have fallen for it. The new Maya channeled the rage, letting it sharpen her focus. She emerged from the shadows, not behind him, but in front of him, walking slowly toward the circle of light. She held no weapon. Her hands were empty, open at her sides. "This ends now," she said, her voice steady. Thorn, emboldened by the sight of her, sneered. "That's right, it does. Kane, kill her." But Kane didn't shoot. He was staring at Maya, a flicker of something recognition in his eyes. The salty dog, the efficiency of the takedown. "I should have known. You move just like him." "Like who?" Maya asked, her brow furrowing. "David," Kane said, a cruel smile twisting his lips. "Your spotter. He was my partner, before he was yours. In another life, we learned the same lessons. He just wasn't good enough to survive them." The world tilted on its axis. The man who had trained with David was now working for the monster who was threatening her family. The past wasn't just haunting her, it had come back to kill her. The rage she had been controlling finally broke its chains. This wasn't business anymore, it was personal. The revelation hung in the air, heavier than the waterlogged atmosphere of the warehouse. Kane, the man standing before her, shared a past with the ghost that haunted her every waking moment. The man she blamed herself for losing. "You're lying," Maya whispered, but she knew he wasn't. The way he stood, the way he held his weapon, it was all terrifyingly familiar. "Am I?" Kane replied, his smile widening. David was weak, sentimental. He always hesitated at the kill shot. "A fatal flaw in our line of work. I heard you inherited it. Ran away when the job got too real." Every word was a poison dart, aimed at the deepest wound in her soul. She saw it then, the scene in the mountains, but this time it was different. Had David hesitated? Was that why the sniper had gotten the shot off first? Kane was planting seeds of doubt, trying to shatter her foundation. But as he spoke, something else happened. The rage, the guilt, it didn't shatter her, it coalesced. It hardened into a diamond-pure certainty. David wasn't weak, he was good. And this man, this ghoul, wearing his memory as a weapon, was a desecration of everything David stood for. "You're right about one thing," Maya said, her voice resonating with a newfound power. "The job got too real. It was filled with men like you." She moved, not with the explosive speed she'd used on the others, but with a deliberate, lethal grace. Kane was ready. He didn't fire his gun, he dropped it, pulling a combat knife from his belt. He knew a gunshot in here was a liability. This was going to be settled up close. Their fight was a brutal, silent ballet. It wasn't the clumsy brawling of the vipers. It was the deadly dance of two master craftsmen. Blocks, parries, strikes. Cain was strong, technical, vicious. He fought to kill, but Maya was fighting for something more. She was fighting for David's memory, for Leo's future, for her own soul. She took a cut on her forearm, a deep gash that slicked her skin with blood. She ignored the pain. She used his momentum against him, redirecting his lunge, and slammed her elbow into his ribs. He grunted, but recovered, the blade of his knife flashing in the dim light, catching her cheek. While they fought, Marcus Thorne watched, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and exhilaration. This was power, real power, and he wanted it. The fight spilled out of the circle of light and into the shadowy maze of the warehouse. The clang of the knife hitting a metal crate, the soft thud of bodies hitting concrete. Detective Miller, sitting in an unmarked van a quarter-mile away, listened to the sounds through the high-gain microphone aimed at the warehouse. The sounds had gone from panicked shouts to silence, punctuated by a series of muffled impacts. "What's going on in there?" a young officer asked. "A ghost is cleaning house," Miller muttered, gripping his own sidearm. He had followed Maya. He didn't have a warrant, he didn't have backup yet, but he had a gut feeling that whatever was happening in that warehouse, she was at the center of it, and she might not walk out. He'd made a call. The SWAT team was 20 minutes out. She just had to last. Back inside, Maya was tiring. The blood loss was making her dizzy. Cain pressed his advantage, forcing her back against a stack of heavy, chain-wrapped pallets. He lunged, the knife aimed at her throat. This was it, the kill shot. But she hadn't inherited David's hesitation. She had learned from it. Instead of trying to block the knife, she moved into the attack. She turned her shoulder, letting the blade sink into the thick muscle below her collarbone. The pain was blinding, an explosion of pure agony. But it was a trap. Her arm was now pinned, but his was too. Her other hand, the one he wasn't expecting, shot up, the garrote wire she'd concealed wrapped around her knuckles. She looped it over his head and pulled. Cain's eyes bulged. He dropped the knife, his hands clawing at the wire digging into his throat. He was stronger than her, but leverage and desperation were on her side. She held on, her vision starting to tunnel from the pain and blood loss, her entire world narrowing to this single, terrible act. He thrashed, his struggles growing weaker, until finally, he slumped forward, unconscious. Maya shoved his body off her and stumbled back, clutching her shoulder, gasping for air. Blood poured from her wounds. From the center of the warehouse, a slow clap began. Marcus Thorne stood there, his face illuminated by the single bulb. His fear was gone, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated greed. "Bravo," he said, his voice trembling with excitement. "Truly a masterpiece, you see. This is what you were made for, not pouring drinks, this. Join me, Maya, together, we could own this city. I can protect your brother. I can give you anything you want." Maya looked at him, at his expensive suit and his manicured hands. He was the source of it all, the rot. "I already have what I want," she panted, blood dripping from her chin. "My brother's safety, and your head on a platter." Thorne's face fell, the mask of civility dropped away, revealing the petulant, entitled monster beneath. "You stupid bitch, you could have had it all." He fumbled inside his jacket, pulling out a small, silver pistol. "If I can't have you, no one can." He raised the gun. Crack! But the shot didn't come from Thorne's pistol. It came from the darkened doorway of the warehouse. Thorne staggered, a red spot appearing on his shoulder, his gun clattering to the floor. Detective Frank Miller stood there, smoke curling from the barrel of his revolver. "Marcus Thorne," Miller's voice boomed in the sudden silence, "you're under arrest." As if on cue, the wail of sirens grew louder, converging on the shipyard. The flashing red and blue lights painted the cavernous warehouse in strobing, hellish colors. The war was over. Maya looked at Miller, then at the unconscious bodies of her enemies. She had won, but the victory felt hollow. She finally allowed herself to feel the pain, and the world dissolved into a black, welcoming darkness as she collapsed to the floor. Months later, the autumn sun cast a warm, golden light over Port Victory. The Salty Dog was no longer a dive. It had been renovated, the dark wood cleaned and polished, new lights installed. It was clean, welcoming, business was good. Marcus Thorne's empire had crumbled. With Maya's testimony and evidence gathered from Thorne's penthouse, Detective Miller had been able to connect him to smuggling, extortion, and several unsolved murders. Kane, facing a life sentence, had cut a deal, giving up the entire organization. The Port Victory Vipers were a memory. Maya stood behind the new bar, her arm in a sling, a faint scar tracing a line on her cheek. She was watching Sam laugh with a customer. It was a good sound, peaceful. Her brother, Leo, was safe. He was at the top of his class, blissfully unaware of the war his sister had fought for him. She had protected her castle. Detective Miller walked in, taking a seat at the bar. "On duty, Frank?" Maya asked, a small, genuine smile on her face. "Just getting a coffee," he said, then looked at her. "The brass wanted to offer you a job, consultant, help train the SWAT guys. They were impressed." Maya shook her head. "I'm retired." "That's what I told them," Miller grinned. "Some ghosts are best left to their own business." He took a sip of the coffee she poured for him. "You did a good thing, Maya. You made this city safer." She looked around her bar, at the peaceful faces, the easy laughter. She hadn't found the silence she was looking for. She had discovered something better. She couldn't erase her past. She couldn't silence the ghosts. But she could build a life around them, a life worth fighting for. The Wraith wasn't a curse she had to run from. It was a part of her, a tool she could use to protect the fragile peace she had finally found. The sun streamed through the front window, and for the first time in a very long time, Maya Rivas felt warm. She wasn't hiding anymore. She was home. The journey to find peace is rarely a straight line. Sometimes, to find the quiet, you have to walk through the heart of the storm. Maya Rivas, the woman they called Wraith, learned that you can't run from who you are, but you can choose what you fight for. She faced down her own demons and an entire criminal empire, not for glory or for vengeance, but to protect the ones she loved. It's a reminder that the strongest people are often the ones who have been through the most fire, and that true strength isn't about the wars you fight, but the peace you build in the aftermath. If this story of resilience and hidden strength resonated with you, show your support by hitting that like button and subscribing to the channel for more touching stories you won't want to miss. And we want to hear from you. What does it mean to be a true warrior? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for watching.